Welcome to today's webinar, Improving Customer Service on Social Media. We've got a great agenda today. I think you're going to find it very fascinating. In terms of today's introduction, I'm doing the introductions. I'll also do the top tips session at the end. I'm Jonty Pearce. I'm editor of Call Centre Helper. We're also delighted to be joined by Martin Hill-Wilson, who's a real expert on customer service. He runs a consulting company, Brainfood Consulting, and he's going to be talking about social customer service on two levels, if you like, the introduction, and also be covering a more advanced level in there as well. Delighted also to be joined by a regular contributor to some of our webinars this year, which has been Mike Murphy, who's Regional Practice Manager for Interactive Intelligence. And Mike's going to be talking us through some of the technology that underpins social media within customer service. We've got your chance to contribute your tips, and we've got, as I said, a bottle of champagne for the best tip. So you can send those in during the webinar, and we've also got interactive live questions and answers from the audience. But before we get into that, what we're going to do is just take a little pinch poll of the audience to have a look at some of the polls. So what we're going to do is ask some questions of you. So the first question is, do you intervene on customer service issues on social media? Martin, you can't see the results coming up on the screen. What would you predict would be the percentage of companies who do that?
Well, I think it's going fast, and I would guess it's going to be somewhere probably between 20 and 30%.
Ah, well, I think we've got a rather different audience here, possibly because we're going to be talking about the topic. Just going to share the results.
Wow.
51% of companies on today's webinar are already intervening on customer service issues on social media. So I think we've got a great mixed audience. 30%, 37% aren't. Right, so my next poll question to everyone is, what headaches do you have with customer service issues on social media? So I'll just launch the poll there. So the issues you've got, so we've got 5 issues we've selected. Marketing own the channel, so it's not effectively within the contact center yet. We can't scale to meet with demand, and you're allowed to vote on more than one answer. Can't connect CRM or customer data. Getting management buy-in or budget to doing different things, or skilling up people. So if you'd like to vote on there, if there is a headache that you have that we haven't mentioned, if you'd like to put that into the question box, and we'll have a look at those later. So just like to, we're just waiting for a few more votes to come through now. So if you'd like to select any headaches that you have there, we're getting 2 clear answers coming through here. Mike, any prediction on what one of those might be?
So I'm thinking marketing on the channel perhaps, and connecting to CRM.
Ah, well, you've got one of those right. Just to share the results with everyone there. And what we're seeing now, the 2 biggest pinch points, biggest one is actually getting management buy-in or budget.
That's interesting.
A surprise.
60% of the audience is doing it, and we're still looking for buy-in.
Yeah. So, you know, and that's quite an interesting one, because this is probably the one area that's probably easiest to get management buy-in for right now, but not necessarily budget. Marketing owning the channel. That's a real tricky one. Cannot connect CRM data. That's quite a surprisingly large amount. Can't scale to meet the demand. I guess at this stage demand could be relatively constrained. So now we've gone through some of those. What I'd like now to do is, if you could type into the question box, what is your biggest headache of all of those? And possibly, if we haven't got them mentioned there, if you'd just like to put into the question box what you think those things are likely to be. So we're starting to see a thing. The biggest headache, Anne has said, our business thinks if we embrace social media, it's going to give disgruntled or complaining customers a public forum to slag us off.
It's a nightmare.
So that's going to be a particular challenge, and you know, it could actually become quite proactive. She mentioned. Catherine's asked how you plan your resource. Marcel has said deciding on what the relevant channels are for business-to-business communication, which has been interesting me. Graham has said the headache for me is how this affects the whole business and their lack of buy-in to the responses needed. So I guess not just necessarily you can do it, but you've got to bring the other rest of the organisation thing rather than acting as a sticking plaster. Internal negativity is something that Steve says. Catherine has said trying to track volumes and plan resource.
Yeah.
Jason has said dealing with untruthful customers in a public forum. So we've got quite a number of different things on that. We'll come back to that later. I'm now delighted to introduce Martin to you. Martin is going to take us through some of those issues. So I'll just change presenter across now. And Martin, if you'd like to take us through your presentation, which I know will be addressing some of those issues.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good set of considerations and questions. I suppose in many respects they reflect the full spectrum of opportunity and fear that social customer service throws up. I mean, probably most people begin from a defensive position wondering what the reputational damage of this is going to be, because you know, previously we never really knew when a customer was screaming in the IVR having a bad time. We never really knew if we were interacting with a customer complaints department whether or not actually we would eventually get what we wanted, and we had no real recourse to actually escalate that. Now the whole thing with social is, of course, it's transparent and it's real time, which is a tremendous threat to poor levels of customer service, but also if you up your game, it's a tremendous opportunity at the same time. So what I want to do today is to take you through as if you were just embarking on it. So I guess that represents potentially 40% of you out there. But for the rest of you that have started, and if I link the points up that you've started but still finding it difficult to maybe get management buy-in, I'm going to talk about some of the developmental issues that you need to be looking at and hopefully give you some ideas about how you can present a better argument for why the organization that you're in at the moment ought to really be investing in this. So let's start with some research, because I think this is actually part and parcel of building the business case, which is translating some of the figures I'm going to show you now into your own market context. But the point underneath all of this is to say a simple thing. Life is changing fast. So let's deal with one point, which is in fact an obvious one, and that is with half the planet, half the UK, probably at least half of your customer base already on social network platforms such as Facebook. There's a great many brands at the moment experimenting with trying to do sales. And basically, wherever you try to sell, you will find that service follows. In this particular instance, I was giving an example of an airline, and guess what? If you're trying to sell tickets directly off of Facebook, you're going to find at the end of the day that you're also going to have to deliver on the service requests that naturally follow from that. And just to confirm that, a recent piece of research from a March poll shows again actually quite a high level of expectation from Facebook users that in fact brands are available to them to offer information and customer services, and that's a global response. And again, just as a point of comparison, that has in fact grown pretty rapidly. I'll just give you a UK example about that growth in a second. But first and foremost, this is an easy way to present the statistics to say that if you imagine an hour's worth of time which we spend online, what proportion of that is actually spent in social network activity, and roughly speaking, a quarter of time is spent doing that. Now, one of the latest pieces of research coming out of the UK is a Fleischmann-Hillard study, came out last month, and it says that basically since August of last year, where about 20% or a fifth of us were using social media to interact with brands, that's now risen up to 36%. So in other words, with the incline, the progression of interest is really growing pretty fast. And interestingly, still part of that same study, there's a considerable number of people saying, do you know what? Actually, interacting with brands via social media gives me a better experience of being served than traditional call center routes. So at this point in time, there's a very strong upswing and actually level of expectation being set that it is easier for me, there's less customer effort if I try to interact via social. Now that, of course, is going to deliver us problems in terms of being able to facilitate that level of expectation, but we'll move on to that in a second. The other thing is that actually, just to compare, of that 36% who have been interacting with brands via social, how much of that has been focused upon service requests. This is from a different source, Amex. It's a global study that they do every year, and you can see there quite clearly that as far as the UK is concerned anyway, 14% of us have currently used it just for interacting on service requests. I'll augment that with a little story that I picked up literally a couple of days back from somebody that I quite frequently talk to, Alex, who actually heads up customer service over at Serif. Now, if you look at the top right-hand corner there, they are an online brand. And by the way, the degree to which social is adopted does have a context to it. So if you are primarily an online brand, you will probably find more people naturally wanting to interact with you as a result of that. But anyway, in his particular context, he was saying to me that actually we started last year about 1% of traffic being social. It's grown to about 6% already, and he reckons by the end of the year it's going to be 8%. So again, another indicator that customers are beginning to flock to this channel now. And anybody from a senior perspective that is saying this has not yet arrived as far as customer service is concerned, already that level of data is contradicting it. You need to be planning and doing it if not already there. And the other interesting point to make is actually what impact does social have on customers. Now, the thing I'm going to show you here might just be to do with the fact that early adopters in social are a different kind of a breed. But basically, those that have and have not used social to get involved in customer service do clearly behave in a different and more vocal and more extreme fashion. So in terms of willing to spend more, not buying because of a poor service, willingness to communicate about good and bad service experiences, again, it's proportionally increased. It's rather like the statistics that you see about the argument of multi-channel. And often you will find that multi-channel customers actually have a much greater propensity to purchase than single-channel users. So in other words, there is a correlation between the degree to which customers are engaged with brands and the degree to which they respond as a result of that. So if you take that as just a package of data, we're looking at a much more communicative and an increasingly willing audience to interact with us as far as social is concerned. So that leads to a very, very popular topic, which is normally one of the early ones, which is who gets to own it. And the fact of the matter is, because social was initially a marketing issue, they have picked up the baton and they've picked up the tab in terms of ownership. And what I've presented you with here is a typical Mexican standoff, I suppose, between two perspectives. Marketing, for example, will say, do you know what, customer service is the new marketing, and what they really mean by that is actually now that service is transparent and visible, the impact of our service quality materially impacts brand equity and value. That's what we own, that's what we're now therefore worried about. And probably most marketeers at the end of the day will say, we now want to influence the quality of interaction that you're having with customers. Now, that's probably rather pretentious, in fact, if you think about it, because for the last 30 years, what else have we been doing in customer service? But nonetheless, they want to get involved in that. And increasingly, I see evidence of people doing that traditional piece of work, which is translating brand values into interaction guidelines and possibly even behavioral training programs. Look on the right-hand side there, and you ask the similar kind of question to people in the contact center. And whilst they obviously want to have it in their own zone, it is slightly more ambiguous in terms of who should own it. And the reality is this. Social is interesting and catalytic from one point of view. It doesn't really care about your internal divisions and your boundaries and your silos. And the fact that actually we have a vested interest from a marketing perspective, a sales perspective, a PR perspective, and a servicing perspective actually is quite an interesting challenge as far as where does it therefore sit in an organization. Now, it'd be interesting to find out what your collective experience is on this as well. So Jonty is just going to hand you over a poll which gives us an opportunity to find out what your experience is in your business in terms of who currently owns social media in your organization. Is it marketing, customer service? Could well be a combination of both, by the way, or it may be other, might be, for example, outsourced to a third party, or you might not even know.
So I think we've got some clues probably came through from the earlier poll about what some of the issues are with. So I'm expecting we'll probably have quite a high marketing figure on here. Let's just go and have a look and see what the results came up. And what we see is 47% is owned by marketing, 7% owned by customer service, 36% by both. And I see quite often on things like Twitter, you have the, if you like, the marketing Twitter, and then you also have the customer service account on Twitter. So there's sort of dual ownership. That's actually quite a good way of getting it out of marketing, I guess. So quite a range there.
Now that's actually, just to hold there, that's interesting, because in fact most survey at this point in time will say that roughly 70% of social customer service is owned by marketing or PR. Now what we see here is possibly an advancement there, because if it's owned by both, that may have been the accommodation that's happened as a result, because if you look at 47 and 36, it might just be that actually that gets back to that original figure, but we've now evolved from that point.
Yeah, and Jason has said very much in line with that, it is both, but it was a struggle at first to convince marketing to relinquish hold of it all entirely. And Graham has said ours is owned by the comms team who sit within there. So not necessarily marketing as a whole, but the actual communications PR team.
I'm just picking that point up. Again, I think whilst marketing remained extremely concerned about impact and brand and all the rest of it, they do recognize also that they are not operationally geared to run this, nor do they have the infrastructure. And by the way, social is also throwing up its own challenges from a core marketing discipline, which is the level of engagement expected. So in fact, if you listen hard to your marketing colleagues, you will find them with a mixture of motives, one of which is to maintain a quality standard, but actually they're more than happy to hand over operational responsibility. And that's the clue that one really needs to work on, and there's an accommodation in terms of how that takes place. So on that basis, there is in fact an emerging set of options that are coming through now, and reading that set of options clockwise, one of them is obviously actually putting social customer service within the contact center environment. Now that probably either reflects an extremely politically influential customer service director who wins the argument immediately, or it might actually reflect a fairly advanced state because you recognize that the infrastructure actually is within customer service, and therefore social channels are best managed there, therefore they get to be centralized. The other one, working around the clock, decentralized, that probably reflects the fact that there is maybe a mixed small team, because at this point in time still the resourcing is extremely small relative to the call center. It may be decentralized in marketing or PR, and it may have a mix of people actually running in it, and it probably isn't working using the same workflows and the same technology as the contact center. It may be that you've handed that out to a third party, and again often marketeers will have maybe been advised by their own agencies in terms of this, and often the ability to do some of the workflow around of managing it will have come out of the listening platforms that those agencies will be providing to the marketeers. And then finally, a combination of decentralized and centralized. In our old language of call centers, that's a virtualized model, which is not uncommon. And what we're really saying there is that actually we probably have to have a number of different departments now able to plug in and listen to the customer and respond according to their skill sets. So let's actually move on to this next thing, which is to do with intervention. And I think a key part of your education of the senior team is to actually explain the core difference. And this is one way of talking about it, which is actually people don't necessarily come to you any longer as far as social is concerned. They talk about you somewhere out there, and therefore the name of the game changes from a reactive to an increasingly proactive model, which therefore suggests one of the first things you've got to be able to do is listen. Now, one thing you need to find in your own organization is what level of competency you've currently got. What you're staring at there is a pretty elaborate version which is the Social Media Listening Command Center, very good title, from Dell. But you can see from the volumes that they're monitoring on a daily basis that clearly it requires a pretty significant investment to do that. That's at the top end of the market. Here's a cheap end of the market, which is the Martin Hill Wilson version of monitoring, which is actually Google Alerts does a pretty good job on that, and there are various versions in between. But fundamentally, you need to know where your customers are talking, because if you look at this map of the social web, you can add anything from the left-hand side, which is your own website with social components, such as blogs and forums and stuff like that, or you can go to some of the large watering holes like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc., etc., or you can go even further out, and it's not uncommon to find actually people talking about your brand in a completely unassociated forum, because it's a common point of interest that two people have got, and they just happen to be talking about your brand. So one of the key things you've got to do with listening is discover where they hang out. That then lends itself to actually a quite different workflow. And again, you can see the combination of traditional customer service, you know, phone calls, emails, all that kind of stuff, some of the new social channels, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc., theoretically and ideally feeding then into an upgraded CRM capability, which really means that we should be starting to capture social profiles as much as the traditional demographic and contact history stuff. And then notice the social CRM team is a blend of different capabilities. And then you have automated response, personal to personal response, etc., etc. But that's one of the key things you've got to work out, a new workflow, and also start to work out in quite a lot of detail when you interact and when you don't. Now, this particular example is for community-based customer management, but the principle is the same. When do I get involved? When do I not get involved? If we do, who does, and how do we do that? And by the way, that particular level of governance is also extremely important when you're dealing with escalation and complaint management, because one of the things about social is it can go viral positively and negatively at the speed of light. And unless you are extremely well rehearsed with your fire drill around of what happens in those circumstances, that's where you start to have the nightmare that marketeers dream about.
And Caroline, on your reference to the Dell support center, had said, you know, was it due to Dell health issues that they invested in such a,
without a doubt,
shiny command center?
And in fact, interestingly, probably the most progressive social brands at this point have all been metaphorically kicked out the backside, which is a shame, but most people do seem to be learning fastest by having a kicking in the first instance. So actually, here we go. That's a good cue into this area, complaint management. So just cast your eye on that. 166 million complaints a year. We're more vocal than anybody else in the EU. We're now deciding actually we will also air those in a public arena. And by the way, the thing that upsets us most is customer service. Now, that's one survey. If we had the time today, I could trot you out half a dozen of those. On that basis, it is therefore quite extraordinarily dangerous to see this statistic. And by the way, this is one of a number of stats which are out there. At the moment, most brands, because they haven't, marketeers haven't yet handed it over to customer service, are not responding back to customers. All right, very, very dangerous environment. And the customer expectation is growing daily that actually, if I communicate with you, I am expecting something. And if I'm complaining, I most certainly am. So why is that important? And this is, by the way, a good set of slides to show your senior people. If you've got somebody like Stephen Fry with clearly 3 million followers, it stands to reason that you don't muck him around. And in fact, if you look at his comment here, it's very careful. It's completely in character. Ooh, Virgin Media has gone down on me. Second thing is the warning, which is I still actually have not received a ticket or declared a fault. Excuse me for a second. And anyway, walk is in gym now, by which he really means is get your act sorted before I come back or else. Now, there you can understand what you're meant to be doing. Interestingly, and some of you probably know this story, is a chap called Dave Carroll, who famously had his guitar broken by United, was not known at the time, became known simply because he then wrote a great country western song, in fact wrote 3 of them, and ended up with 10 million plus views. So the point is this, you just don't know who is dangerous in terms of your customer base and their level of influence out there. Therefore, you might as well work on the basis that all of your customers deserve and need to be well treated. Okay, so what can we learn from that? First one is actually engagement works, and the quality of communication becomes a key driver now. So again, good example of a guy who even calls himself Angry Britain, actually finds that after a certain level of interaction, he chills out, and the upside we get here is he tweets the fact that he's pleased with that. You might notice halfway down there, by the way, there's a figure called 45. That's his influence score as indexed by, not Klout actually, but peer index. Look at this one. It's a good example, by the way, of Tesco. The story here is quite simply that they mucked up in terms of an order, but interestingly, Mr. Andrew Smith eventually did get satisfaction and said on the right-hand side of the page, you know what, actually at the end of the day they did it right. Here's the evidence of the fact they did it right. Well done. So that's the first thing to learn. Engagement works. The second thing, by the way, is, and this is a lot of people, what they struggle with, particularly with Twitter, is the desire to take it back into private channels like email or chat or even a phone call. The reality is, if people have started with you on Twitter, stay online in that channel if you can. If it gets private, do a direct message, that's perfectly possible, but return as soon as you can do into public view, because then, as you can see at the end of that example, thanks for the help, yes, gets to be public, witnessed by other people, and that's all part and parcel of your overall customer base being able to witness the quality of your service. And if you're doing great interventions, enjoy the kudos of that. The other side here, by the way, is to do detailed policy and guidelines and actually work this stuff out. The story at the bottom, by the way, is a typical Dilbert reality. Beth is our new marketing manager for social service. By the way, company policy forbids the use of Facebook and Twitter at work, and we don't trust you to work from home. And if you blog how lame we are, you're fired. So, as she says, first day, not so good.
And that's quite interesting, because we've had one comment, one of the biggest headaches is trusting staff to have access to Facebook at work.
Yeah.
On the same note, Graham has said, I'd be interested to hear how many people have social media written into their HR policy for internal employees, i.e. using social media in a negative way about others, or about the customers, or about the company. So I think that's
well,
hitting on
most of us will discover once we start this journey that actually it plugs into a much bigger plan, which is called becoming a social business.
Yeah.
And that's to do with some of those broader issues you just raised, Jonty, which is to do with getting the policy agreed. When do we use social media internally, when do we not? And it lays up a whole new set of issues we've never had before, for example. So, moving on. The fine thing to do, by the way, is also to train people. And here's two good examples, again, of organizations that have scaled to having a much broader set of people trained and being able to interact with customers in that way. That's an interesting version, by the way, of how you become customer-centric. So it's a force for change. Quickly, there's another interesting thing that's going on here as well, which is the growth of smartphone. We're over 50% at least now in the UK, and by about 2016, every other phone on the planet will be a smartphone. What does that mean? Oh, excuse me, another point of information, by the way. Hooray! Finally, 4G is going to turn up sometime in the next 12, 18 months in the UK. Basically means faster and more coverage. And interestingly, it feeds straight into our use of social. I mean, of the 900 million on Facebook, half that number access the site via mobile. As you can see, there's another piece of information. So therefore, you're increasingly going to find that your customers are using mobile if they're also using social. Here's an interesting thing for those of you umming and ahhing, by the way, about a mobile app. Make sure that you work hard to make sure that marketing remembers service needs to be integrated into that app, and it's not just a lifestyle thing. Good example of an insurance company that's built service in. Okay, last point I want to make is a key one, which is after you've got it up and running, don't forget, of course, that we're still in a multi-channel world. And this is a good example, reading it in a concentric way, clockwise: discover, search, research, compare, decide, purchase, trust, etc., etc. The journey that we all go on today in today's world is not just a single channel. In fact, they now call it the omni-channel customer. So social actually fits into that picture. And as with all advice that we have on multi-channel, you know, new channels seldom kill old. They simply add on to it. There's another way of looking at that. Cross-channel customer journeys. We typically browse maybe online and we move through a whole number of different environments. The trick there, of course, is the cross-channel management, your ability to get that linked up contextually and maintain the same context, is critically important. And that's actually why people are coming back to customer service infrastructure, because normal social stuff can't do that very well. All right, that's me done. I hope that's given you some food for thought. And I think, are we just going to flip over to another poll?
Yeah, we've got another poll coming up. Thank you very much for that, Martin. And I know we've got lots of questions flooding in, which we'll endeavour to answer a number as we go through the session. So just going to put the poll up on the screen now, and that is, what technology does your contact centre use for social media? So I'll just launch the poll there. Do you effectively have no technology at all? Do you use Twitter or Facebook? And you can vote on more than one of these. Do you use a collection of free social media tools, e.g. TweetDeck or Hootsuite? Do you have a social media monitoring platform? Or have you got the ability to blend emails with phone calls? So I'd just like to vote on that now. And what we're starting to see on there is a bit of a wide diversity of different things coming up there. So a couple more people, if you could just vote now. That's great, thank you very much. And we'll just share the results with everyone. So looks like a small proportion have got next to no technology. We're seeing 65% are using a Twitter/Facebook account. 29% are using a combination of free social media tools. 20% have got a social monitoring platform, and 36% have a way of blending with emails and calls. So I guess that may be semi-manually. So I wouldn't say there's a particularly high penetration of software in that space. So I think
it's still fairly entrepreneurial and early phase in terms of getting on and trying it out.
So that brings us very nicely on to the messages that Mike will be talking about. So just like to hand the presentation across now to Mike Murphy. Mike is Regional Practice Manager for Interactive Intelligence, and Mike will be sharing with us a presentation on technology. Thank you, Mike.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonty. And thank you, Martin, for the great input so far. Very, very interesting. And hopefully it'll be very complementary to the messages I have here with regards to how technology can help to help you execute some of these strategies. So I'm kind of basing my content here, which is kind of encapsulating my experience over 20 years in the customer service space, specifically around contact centers. So to that end, I've always been deploying contact centers for customers to help them do a better job for their customers. So the social media part starts to bring in some very interesting shifts, if you will, and I think they're going to be very exciting for all of us going forward. But the thing I'd like to sort of help you appreciate really is that we can do this in a nice sort of managed and controlled way, so that it's not a case where we're starting to get some erratic behavior in our overall customer service strategy. So in my agenda really that I want to discuss is things like avoiding the danger of creating yet another customer service silo, and obviously this time it would be a social media one. Obviously the challenge that we have to making the social media experience consistent with the other channels that we already have. And like Martin mentioned, we already have voice, email, perhaps chat, etc. So we cannot, they will not be replaced. It's a case of making the overall combination, if you will, consistent for the customer. Obviously, there are some established tools out there that we can sort of like share with you how we're deploying for other customers and give you a sense of what we do for them. And that's very much around reacting to the posts that customers make on social media. But we also have a little video that I want to share with you today, and that's really introducing how we can help to be proactive around social media and help to, if you like, deliver customer service in a different way using things like smart apps and really giving smart customer service delivery. So hopefully there'll be some interesting things there for you as well. And then finally, just a context on how interactive intelligence could look to help implementing one of these strategies to sort of bring social safely into an overall customer service ambition. So really, if we start on the learning that we've all had in sort of contact centers over the last 10 years, really, we've got to get away from creating yet another customer service silo. We have kind of made these mistakes before with calls and chats and emails. We ended up with bunches of guys in different parts of the operation doing specific email handling or specific chat handling. And really what it tends to bring in really is a sense of standalone technology investment. You'll end up with dedicated teams that have their own sort of knowledge base, their own sort of ways of handling customer queries. There'll be sort of like reporting which is specific to that department. Typically, you'll sort of hire different types of people than different, if you will, from what you would normally do in the contact center. I would imagine that there'll be little or no sort of long-term planning around, resourcing and forecasting how many people do I need in various departments. Little thought around the quality processes that we have to kind of coach and improve these individuals to do a better job. And all in all, you probably find that certainly from a social perspective, their sort of definition of success might be quite different from what you're currently deploying elsewhere in your customer service strategy. So, my reflection on that would be that we're kind of in danger of getting like another firm step away from this sort of single customer view. Why? Because we end up with a lot of intelligence about the customer, especially around their social behavior, but it ends up in a sort of separate database. And from that perspective, then that's an opportunity lost. And also remember on this kind of point, customers don't think and behave in silos. They just want to get in touch with their supplier at that moment in time, the most convenient way for them. And that might be a call, it might be an email, it might be a social media hit. So from that perspective, we've got to think about the fact that there is one customer here, albeit they've chosen to connect perhaps on a variety of different channels. So it's on that sort of note about consistency, really, that I kind of wanted to bring this thought process to mind, really, because especially in social media, rather, we have to be consistent. It might look and appear to be another channel coming into the contact center, but actually it's different. It's different. Why? Because it's public. It's one-to-many. It's near real time. You've heard the good stories and the bad stories that Martin alluded to. So from that perspective, we have to be able to cope with and be prepared for the sort of the feedback from customers, which may well be negative. And also from the point of view of things like performance, they will broadcast their sort of experience to their followers. And if that's a long wait time to be answered by a customer service agent, then that will be broadcast. So from that perspective, it has got a sense of giving us some, if you like, impetus to sort of deal with some of these issues which may have been sort of long outstanding. But like I say, if you get it wrong, it'll be broadcast. But on the flip side, if you get it right, you have the opportunity for a good post, a positive post from that customer, and then obviously that will be broadcast too to the wider community. So from that perspective, then just make sure that across channel, every channel, be consistent. Is the key message here. And then this sort of slide talks about how we actually go about doing this. So there are three vendors. There's sort of three sort of brands you can see in the middle. So Buzzient, Radian6, and Right Now owned by Oracle. These are firms that we have worked with in our sort of customer base to deliver these strategies already. And what you can see really is that the applications are out there. They're sort of scouring the sort of the social media sort of infrastructures. You can see them all listed there. Are looking for posts relevant to your brand or your specific product. From that, then they sort of gather some information to tracking customer perception, customer satisfaction, maybe a specific customer product issue, maybe a specific service issue. But from that perspective, they'll end up being fed into like an analytical platform that you see on the bottom left. And from that perspective, then businesses can get a good sense of how things are going as far as social media and their perception by the public. But on the right-hand side, you have a situation where these same applications are able to sort of spot behaviors, spot specific customers perhaps, spot specific associations between a customer and a product, and from that basically create the sort of the notion of I need to have an intervention here because this is quite an important post from an interesting customer that we actually want to escalate and get working on. So from that perspective, it's when we have this idea of an intervention that gets created, that's really where the interactive intelligence would step in with its customer interaction center platform. So from that perspective, then what we have is a situation where we're able to sort of see the number of interventions coming through, if you like, over a period of time. We start to gather some management information about the number of those interventions. And so with that information, as it starts to build, we can start to forecast, to schedule, to track how many people do I need to sort of support these number of interventions on a daily basis. If I sort of start to see that in the wider context of my overall contact center strategy, I'm now thinking about, okay, so I'm forecasting and scheduling against call volumes, expected chat volumes, expected email volumes, and unexpected social media interventions. So from that perspective now, I'm starting to, if you will, bring this into a more structured way of managing the social media channel, shall we say, and bring it into like normal best practice. In a similar way, you could see where quality could fit in. So am I watching Mike and how he responds to posts versus Jonty and how he responds to posts, and doing some recording and watching, doing some analysis of those recordings. We're able to compare and help coach Mike into being a better responder to posts versus you know, Martin, who is the sort of excellence in response to posts. Therefore, he's the guy we've got to sort of develop and coach and become trained up to be as good as. So from that perspective, by sort of bringing in the usual quality management coaching tools, you can see where these interventions can start to become normalized in the sort of the recognized sense of best practice in contact center. And then touching on one of the points that one of you mentioned in the poll with regards to, you know, how about sort of trusting agents and maybe misbehaving on these sort of platforms. Well, if we are recording, as in the sort of context we're looking at here, well, interventions going through a smart contact center would be recorded. And as such, you know, any sort of misbehaviors can be spotted, isolated, and managed in the right and appropriate way. So hopefully you can start to see then where we can see social media becoming, if you like, more structured and more normalized in the sense of how we've been doing customer service to date. So that's really been reflecting on the sort of reacting side of things in social media. I just want to quickly give you a sense on the proactive side. And here I want to kind of run you a quick video just to give you a sense of what Interactive Intelligence are doing around this specific point.
Okay, yeah, Christopher's just sent in a link saying there may be...
Just wait a second, I'll just give it a full screen here. There we go.
It's time to turn customer service into a competitive weapon. Interaction Mobilizer lets your customers hold their service experiences in the palm of their hand, any place, any time, on any mobile device. And it all starts with an app. We've created mobile software that gives you true flexibility and power. You update it, you control it, you brand it, all by editing a text-based file. You can instantly push changes and updates across all mobile platforms, which gives your customers a consistent experience using any device. Once your app is ready, place it in the appropriate app store for your customers to download. They can sign in with an existing user ID on your system, or to engage them on a more personal level, allow them to connect to their Facebook profile. Now, according to the customer's privacy settings, your company has access to a wealth of information. After logging in, customers are given a personalized interface that lets them take care of business on their own. Request new service, check on the status of an order, change account information, whatever you give them access to. When something comes up which requires personal help, getting connected is simple. Mobilizer collects all of the information from Facebook, customer profile, location data, and in-app activity, then skips the main IVR to place a call object directly in the correct queue. If an agent isn't immediately available, Interaction Mobilizer will hold the customer's place in line and let them go back to living their life. Even better, the app updates to show the customer when they can expect an agent to return their call, and an option to delay further if they need to. When it's time to talk, an alert pops to let the customer know a call is coming, and if you choose, even the name and photo of the agent who will be calling. On the agent's side, that pre-call time is used to review the help request, the case history, and the collected information of the customer. If you want, you can even tap into the extra power of video. Not everyone happens to have a smartphone, though. To broaden your reach and give customers yet another option, this entire experience can also be accessed through an app on your company's Facebook page. Rapid multi-platform deployment, seamless customer service access, powerful back-end integration, and a secure and scalable platform all add up to one serious competitive weapon.
Okay, so we just pause there for a second.
And we'll add the link to that onto our website this afternoon.
Great, thank you, Jonty. So just what I'm kind of showing you there really is that as a nice tool, you're able to sort of write it once, broadcast to many, including the sort of social media forums, and if you will, you can start to shift the sort of delivery of customer service, if you will, into a more friendly and sort of interesting and very specific self-help tool for customers. So from that perspective, that's quite an interesting sort of step forward, shall we say, between mobile and social media. So then finally, just to summarize how like an interactive approach would look to embracing this whole channel or new channel, if you like, in the wider existing contact center. I mean, remember, our customers are expecting us to be delivering either hosted or premise. They want it to be sort of simple to use, so a single point of admin. They want it in sort of license form, so you pay for your use, not everything. You can just license the bits that you want. But like this is what customers kind of want today. It's got to be easy. It's got to be pre-integrated. I don't have multiple platforms. So from that perspective, this notion of a single contact center platform, and you can see the list of tools there on multiple contact center applications on a single platform is really, really attractive in the current market. And there you can see where the sort of social media would slot in, along with inbound, email, chat, SMS, and then don't forget what's next. I mean, right now we're figuring out how to get social media, if you will, formally into the contact center, into customer service. Well, don't forget that in 18 months' time there will be something else, and so too, whatever investment you have technology-wise, will need to be able to be ready and embrace that new next step. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Jonty. I believe we have another poll as our next step.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Mike. And I certainly think the whole technology there is an area that you can really start to build on, and particularly getting away from those silos. Perhaps being able to get away with it with email and chat. But I think as we start to get social media into the equation as well, it's just going to become too difficult to do that, and getting towards a universal queue so you can actually put some service levels around everything, I think is going to be very valuable. So just going to share now with you a poll. Which percentage of traffic does social media make up for you? So just going to launch the poll now. The answers are nothing, 1 to 2%, 3 to 5%, 6 to 10%, and more than 10%. I don't want you to quickly go through with a calculator now and work out the exact figure. Just give us a flavour for what volume that's likely to be. So just that's quite interesting, the figures coming through here. And just share the results with everyone now. So a lot of people, very small levels, 1 to 2% is sort of probably the most typical one. 3% have got more than 10% of their traffic coming through on social media now. And I think if we were to do that 6 months ago, we'd see everything jam right up the top there. And I think that the speed of which things have happened in the last 6 months, I've noticed the conversation has gone from should we do it into what is the best way to do it, which leads us very nicely on to the next part of the agenda, which is the chance for you in the audience to send in your tips about social media. Now, there's a bottle of champagne up for grabs here. So far, we've only had 2 tips sent in, which we'll go through in a short while. So you've got this is much better than National Lottery chances of winning on this today. So send those tips in. Just while you're dreaming up those tips, here's a couple I've come through. How not to intervene on social media. Not responding, I think, is one of them. Here's examples of 2 people. One people thinks Emirates is bad, and I'm not picking on any particular company. This is just stuff that I found on Twitter yesterday, the first one that came up. Another person thought they did great customer support. What was their response? Their response was to come up and say, basically give the whole Twitter account to marketing and saying, isn't it great? We've got an offer to suit every budget for getting away this summer. So I think the first thing is, is responding is quite important. How not to intervene? Phone the contact center. I think people would have probably figured that one out for themselves before getting on social media. And here's a couple of tweets that came back yesterday. I just hate it when you contact the business on Twitter and you're referred to call the contact center. And this one actually went back and said, thanks, but the point is the contact center is hopelessly slow at answering the phone, which is why I got onto social media. The other worst one I find is not having a phone number at all, and it's the latest trend to be we're entirely online with email and social. Don't forget that you probably have got a phone number there. You may not want to publish it as the first line, but when it gets to the point where someone wants it, just give it to them. So here's a couple of tips on how to intervene. The first one is request more information. I certainly think Dell have got a long way to go and are using it as a bit of a sticking plaster. I think it's great. Regret any inconvenience caused. Please follow and DM, that means direct message us with the service tag and we'll look into it. And even better is the opportunity to say if you can already identify the customer and it's getting quite complex, arrange a callback from the contact center. And this is the beauty about being integrated within the contact center. So that's a couple of tips. Let's see what you've been able to send in. Now it's your turn for your tips. So Kate has said, put a team of agents together who are already familiar with and passionate about social media. Then make them the face of the company, so customers are interacting with John or Lynn, the social media agent, and include their pictures on Twitter, for example. Mike, that sounds like a very good, very good idea to do, and presumably...
Excellent. I love it. Love it. And I think one of the distinguishing things, particularly with the Twitter style, is that you can identify individuals. And in fact, if you go and have a look at Virgin Money, they've even upped the thing there, because it's not just not only John and Lynn, it's also actually the CEO, who is an identified person on the Twitter team.
Yeah,
now, that's a very deliberate part of being customer-centric. But again, it encourages customers that they think. I mean, another interesting point, by the way, of the top 500 companies in America, the Fortune 500, 5% of their CEOs tweet right now in relationship to what we're talking about. So it's very low. So it's very powerful at the moment for people to actually feel they can interact with real human beings in a brand.
Okay, Catherine says, encourage peer-to-peer communication where customers can answer other customers' questions for you. GiftGaff would be a sort of perfect example of that.
Big fan of that. It's a great idea.
Okay, let's have a look at another tip. If the comment from a social media is nonsense, ignore it. If it's legitimate, take it offline. So yeah, take it offline, but probably leave a message saying you've taken it offline, and then you might get that that positive answer back.
I mean, trolls might not exist in the real world, but they do exist online.
Yeah, you do get some quite big nonsense. Emma says, use the highlights function to display images boldly on the timeline. Yeah. Customers respond positively to the imagery and will bear the Facebook page in mind when they have a need to contact us. So that's a
good idea. Yeah,
interesting one. Like, is that a Facebook-specific one, I guess?
As a more general thing, visual signposting of how to use customer services intelligently. Again, I'm a big fan of that. I think it's a great suggestion.
Oh, wonderful. So Graham sent in, if housed within the contact center, why does it have to be agents that respond? To expand awareness, arrange for this to be part of a person induction to spend some time within the center to answer issues. So I guess that's bringing the wider community of the company into getting answers to questions. And I think that could be
the story behind unified communication.
Could be very. Oh wow, the tips are flooding in now. Respond. So Will says respond to a tweet within 1 and 2 hours, no shorter and no longer, as the message will move on. So really rapidly.
Bank of America operates an SLA of under 5 minutes on Twitter.
Wow. That would really take things out. If using Twitter for marketing, make sure you develop and use consistent hashtags. And there's a few instances I've seen of hashtags being hijacked by disgruntled members of the community. Some quite amusing stories if you want to Google that. Steve sent in a tip saying, once you've resolved a customer issue, especially in private, ask for positive feedback.
Yeah.
Many customers are willing to give it.
And that's where the branding opportunity sits, which is why, well, the Tesco example, keep it in channel, because the opportunity to have the praise at the end of it for others to see is a real plus point.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of dealing with.
And by the way, interestingly, that then becomes visible to senior management, so suddenly they can see the great work that the customer services team is doing. That's one of the ways you get to be more valuable within the internal organisation.
Yeah, lift your profile.
Yeah, and I think that gets around this damage limitation thing and may free up some budget. So I think that's probably my favourite one so far.
Steve is trending.
Steve is trending. Joanna said, use careful selection and recruitment when looking for social media. Look for strong work ethic and ability and desire for job autonomy.
Maria McCann, on that point, by the way, who's over at Spotify, NASOS, she said she looks for people on Twitter who have an obsession with being able to communicate with 140 characters. And she actually does job interviews via that medium. to see how good they are.
Oh, that's a great one. Sean has said, have a unified view, calls, emails, etc. I think that's very strong. Anne says, always admit poor service and say how you'll improve it going forward.
Agreed.
It's very important to communicate. Find out what channels your staff already use, and this may be the best place to start using social media. So I guess, Mike, that sort of ties very well into the whole multi-channel piece about don't just concentrate on the social media element of it. Richard has said, always remain positive and deal with each customer as an individual. Retweet any positive tweets you've received back.
Agreed.
I think that's a great. I think that's a great one. Richard's also trending on there. Competition's hotting up. Kinesh said, set up a multi-channel contact center where agents who are not on calls have real-time access to social media traffic, can come off the queues, address real-time issues, call back client with resolution, and etc.
I mean, I would say, without it being an overt plug, to Mike here, but the ability to manage all the channels through a single queue and a single set of business rules is critical, because social, being real-time, mucks you up entirely if it's operated as a separate universe.
So a couple more ones. Communicate timely, keep in contact with your customer in real time, be open and honest. Honesty is absolutely important on this one. That's also trending. And have a team who will interact well with each other. Also have a handover book for highlighting anything that needs attention, so it isn't missed. I think certainly handout. Yeah, very good piece. Right, we're going to take a couple of questions. There was one I saw coming in earlier, and it's interesting. A question, Martin, you may be able to answer. Data protection requirements. You know, and I think there was a similar one here. You know, are you allowed from data protection if someone starts to put an issue on Facebook or on Twitter? They're sort of sharing something about themselves. You know, how much can you acknowledge, or even if it's not happened?
Well, it's an area. In a sentence, it's an area that you need to consult with carefully internally, simply because what's happening around of data protection, and particularly what social networks have thrown up, is changing fast. So you may all be aware of the cookie law, which was implemented recently. There's another one that's coming through, which is called the right to be forgotten. I think that's still in consultation. I think the US is also looking at that as well. So there's a constant tension between social networks as, for us as consumers, versus social networks as a massive opportunity for brands to take our social graph and use it. And that will remain a tension, and legislation will be introduced. So data protection, as is, will continue to evolve. Do not assume, just because you can interact with customers, that you don't need some kind of legal framework to it. So stay in regular contact as part of your strategy on that, because it will keep changing. The last time I heard lawyers, by the way, talking about the topic, after you'd listened to them for half an hour, the quick answer was, we don't know, and we will wait and see basically what precedents come through the courts. So in other words, you need to be very careful in terms of the way you deal with it. But just because it's social does not invalidate current data protection.
And a final question for, we've got more questions, but one for Mike. How do you align your skill groups with social media? Because I guess it's sort of, this is probably where the technology starts to come in.
But in other words, yes, I mean, with any sort of skill routing application, you define the skill of the individual, and then you sort of decide what proficiency that they are of handling that skill, and then from that determine who's the next best available skilled person for it. But it kind of also fits in with, shall we say, quality management and coaching and development. So to that end, as you sort of increase somebody's skills, they maybe start on Twitter, then move to Facebook, and then sort of like move to other channels as well. So too, you kind of reflect that profile in the skill routing matrix. So it's very much like what we would have been doing so far with the existing skill management that we have, just embracing the fact that it's now social media.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we've got lots of. We're going to type up all the tips and all the questions, and we'll put those onto the website.